At Say Hi to the Future, we believe exploring and nurturing human ingenuity is a leadership imperative. It must be sought and can be honed in every leader. I'm your host, Saquib Vali. Explorers Say Hi to the Future, the fast growing community highlighting the human side of ingenuity. We are honored and delighted to have Hari Panday as our guest today. Hari is board chair, president, and CEO, governance expert, faculty member, author, and speaker. Hari started his career in audit at the PwC, moved and built his career in banking, with the highlight being founding president and CEO of ICICI Bank Canada, with portfolio responsibilities for North America. Since then, Hari has served on numerous boards and is currently on the board of the Ontario Securities Commission and Meridian Credit Union. Hari is also president and CEO of Panvest Capital. And as if that was not enough, Hari is a professor of Masters in Financial Accountability at York University. And there is more. Hari is an honorary colonel in the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you for your service. Before I engage with Hari, I do need to read the disclaimer. The views expressed today are Hari's own and do not necessarily represent the views of the Ontario Securities Commission or its board of directors. Welcome, Hari, and thank you for taking time out from your highly governed schedule. Hari, I feel we would need multiple episodes, and still we would not do full justice to your contributions and insights.
Well, thank you. First and foremost, I think my foundation for what I have done has been my work that I did in the public accounting field with Pricewaterhouse, in those days known as Pricewaterhouse and Company, later became PricewaterhouseCoopers. But really, it comes out of the accounting profession and leading up to just getting to know, as a newcomer to Canada back in 1975 when I arrived, getting to know the Canadian business scene and getting to meet with people who are highly affluent, well embedded in the corporate life in Canada, people at this partners level or managers or senior managers level within the PwC structure, and getting to be a chance to go and see how things were being done in major companies, major corporations in the world. And it was an incredible exposure to me personally, which many people do not get. Now, the journey really started at PwC, where I actually started to work in the administrative services, which was basically handling stationery for partners and accountants who were there. And 6 months after I joined the firm, it was like a mailroom clerk, quite frankly. And about 6 months to a year, within a year, I was able to go and finish some courses, and I was given a chance to be on the professional side of the firm. So there was my real professional beginnings. And as I went along, the opportunities came in the financial services sector. So my first and foremost engagement was, in those days, it was known as the EDP auditors, electronic data processing auditors, which has now become IT auditors these days. So my training goes back to the days of IBM 360, 370 machines, and doing the programming on punched cards and whatnot. And I remember the first Tandy computer as well. So that was my start of my true business environment, where I was fully immersed, actually. So I joined an old bank called the Continental Bank of Canada, which is the predecessor to HSBC in Canada now. So HSBC and Lloyds Bank PLC Canada. So I chose financial services because of its diversity, Sakib. And I think what I had observed at that early stage of my professional life was that working in a large institution, such as it was Continental Bank, which is a smaller bank, but then moving to Bank of Montreal and HSBC Bank Canada, that joining a large enterprise like BMO or like HSBC, if you changed jobs, it was like changing employment, because you move from one function to the other, and the entity is so large and such a global footprint that it was like changing a complete company. You move from one company to the other, but you're really moving from department to department. Having said that, I found that along the journey, I found some incredible mentors. and incredible mentors who gave me an appreciation for banking as a business while having my accounting foundation, but not banking as a banker, as the world at large would know, but the business of banking. And that's what carried me forward throughout my career, moving from Bank of Montreal back to HSBC, and then getting an opportunity to start a bank from scratch, which was ICICI Bank Canada. And I was recruited by the parent company in Mumbai, and it was their first global footprint. So before that, the bank had never been overseas, but it had started to engage in the UK, in Canada, and some other geographies like Singapore. And eventually it went to some 17 different countries at the time. But in terms of the full banking relationship, the full banking platform is the strategy that I kind of convinced the bank in India. And they were initially coming to set up a rep office, but then after seeing the merits of having both their feet on the ground, they agreed that they would come with full commitment and look at a strategy from a different lens. So I got a chance to do all that, Sakib, and then of course the world, you gain knowledge, you gain connections, you build relationships, and from that we moved from banking into wealth management, from wealth management into my work with various boards. I was on the board of ICICI Bank Canada. We started building not just the banking platform, but also wealth management on a North America-wide basis. So we were a registered firm with OSC in Canada as an exempt market dealer. We were registered with FINRA in the US. We acquired an asset manager in New Jersey. So all that started to shape up. And then, of course, my shift happened in the board life, in the corporate governance, at a time when the bank wanted me to move to India, actually, quite frankly. And that, just from a family point of view, did not materialize because of our children going to university and other things that were happening at the time. Nevertheless, I moved onto the board of the Canadian Securities Exchange, a mining exploration company, later on an insurance company with respect to the professional liability insurance, and then assurance business for Terrion Wardy Corporation, where I ended my full 9-year stint as a chairman of the board. But parallelly, what was happening is my work was growing in corporate governance. And I was invited to conduct a course within the Masters of Financial Accountability at York University in a graduate program. So I was able to design the program. And what the university wanted was not just an academic. The university wanted to have someone from industry would bring that experience from industry and kind of, in hindsight, I can say, and kind of create some activists in governance field with the young minds, who were available to me to get them to feel why corporate governance and accountability were becoming so critical, especially after the recession in '08 and '09 and all the corporate, corruption events that took place, or the misgivings of losing, companies that were really creating a very bad image of corporate America, corporate Canada, corporate in the G7 countries overall. We had the incidents of Enron and WorldCom, and on it goes, right? So the trust in corporations was really going to its lowest point in those days. And I felt that with that experience, with this knowledge I had with hands-on from the banking sector, I could use it better in the corporate governance field. And particularly in my banking life of some 40 years, 35, 40 years, 1/3 of my banking life has been in dealing with restructurings, what we call special loans or loan workouts. So I had the chance to run some 20, 25, 30 different companies hands-on as a banker, but companies that were in insolvency mode or in restructuring mode, or highly leveraged companies that the bank had their eyes on to watch every move they did. And I had a chance to run hotels and funeral homes and trucking companies and printing companies and bottling companies in that career. So it was not just the financial services in its purest sense, but also industrial companies and some services companies, giving me that experience that became very useful for me in teaching corporate governance at York, but also practicing it in the corporate boards in various roles.
That's what an amazing career. But for now, Hari, let's double click on governance, right? What challenges do you see board members face today? And I'm not speaking just in terms of traditional oversight, right? But more in the governance as a discipline. In the words of David Beatty, for example, the full gambit of hindsight, oversight, and foresight. Give us some understanding on what are some of the challenges that you see board governance or board members face today.
Sure. Given the ecosystem now, and the world has for directorship, for directors and directorship as a profession, what has changed and what has changed over the years, and as I've seen it over 2 decades of reshaping of this profession, if I was to call directorship as a profession, that's how I treated myself. The field of corporate governance, it has become so multidimensional and multi-layered that the best way to say is the job description of a corporate director today is different than this time last year, for example, and the year before, and the year before that. So if you were to look at the demarcation of the COVID period of 3 years, pre-COVID, COVID, and post-COVID, if you were to demarcate that in that manner, today, the first and foremost, what you have is the regulatory pressures that the boards have. I call it pressures because there's so many different areas. If you were to pick up any industry, whether it's aerospace and defense, financial services, transportation, telecom, every industry has regulatory, almost barrage of regulations that it's becoming very tough for board members to be up to date and be familiar, not just what the new regulations call for, but to have the time to reflect what are the spirit of those regulations? What is initiating and what do we want to achieve through that regulatory ecosystem, for which you have to prepare your systems, your personnel, your talent pool, training programs, reporting systems, monitoring systems. How do you deal with exceptions, and then how do you sustain those systems? So there's a whole chain of events that goes with the regulatory change. It's not just simply saying, and often I get into conversation with the regulators or hear them talk about new regulations. And they say, well, we don't want to really put the regulatory burden on you. Well, the reality is that it is a burden on the industry, and therefore you have to pay attention to what happens post facto. Once you issue the pronouncement of a law, then there are always things that a corporation has to do. And the corporations, or even nonprofits for that matter, not for profit, but also not for profits also, they need to think it through from cradle to grave. You can't simply say, well, we'll just tick and bop here and there and have a checklist and we'll just meet the regulations. Because it goes back to what I said, what is the spirit of that regulation? I have tremendous respect for public service and the bodies, the legislative bodies. And therefore, the first and foremost challenge for directors, I believe, today is to just know what the regulators are trying to achieve, because there are many ways to achieve it, not just by the letter of the law, but also the spirit of the law. So that's first and foremost. The second thing that I would say is the talent pool. Yes, we have a lot more qualified directors today, but the directors with the right kind of experience for the right activities in a company at the right time, so finding the right people for the right job at the right time, that has become very prominent. So it's no longer the case of bringing simply charismatic people onto the board, people with big names and people with, high visibility, but those who can come with the bias for execution from 35,000 feet, and that is something every board that I have come across, not just the ones that I'm serving on, but those who I'm advising or who I'm interacting with, they're all emphasizing on the board composition, the board skill matrix, what do we need, the new technology that is coming in. And as you know very well from your background, Sakib, is that the elements of cybersecurity, et cetera, they are so dominant today, but and things are moving along that journey. And today we hear about artificial intelligence, we hear about quantum computing. Pretty soon we're going to be talking about, I believe, space tech, because a lot of the things we don't realize how much of that is being handled by space technology already. Your GPS systems, your data storage, and on and on and on we can go. So trying to deal with such situations where there are new disciplines that we have to embrace, and where we have to advise the senior management who's handling the business on a day-to-day basis. Directors are not dealing with situations on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, they need to spend a lot more time in getting to know what happens with situations like cybersecurity. What are the tangential issues with cybersecurity? It could be very simple things as reporting to the privacy commissioner and how to do it, when to do it, so the corporation doesn't have reputational risk that it has to deal with in a bigger way than just the problem itself. You see, and so for directors, um, you know, 2 years ago, and particularly during COVID, cybersecurity used to be one of the top three things on the minds of corporate directors worldwide. And lo and behold, I had done a lot of research on this area. The first time a cyber attack took place was some 35 years ago.
Mhm.
And so what directors kind of suffered, what the profession suffered was suddenly cybersecurity became, in the last 5 years, as a major issue, and whereas in fact it really started to happen 35 years ago. So that is another challenge for directors, is to not let things procrastinate in a way. Because even today, you have directors who, when you look at survey the boards, the IT skill in boards is very low percentage even today. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but it's something like, below 20%.
Hmm. Let's go with something broad while focused at the same time. What are some macro trends you're witnessing play out within the banking industry, or for that matter, on the governance side? What are some implications? And what are your thoughts for the leaders within the industry?
Well, first and foremost, the biggest issue that in the financial services and many other industries that is happening today is the geopolitical risks. You know,
Mhm.
it has had so much implication, not just for the financial services industry with respect to their internal effects of that, but also externally how their customers are being affected. On top of it, you have new dimensions such as ESG, etc. Your climate change that is coming, that is affecting the banks and then their customers, particularly in a country like Canada, which is so resource based even today. And so that is where the biggest focus that their bank boards have is how do you manage these risks, how the geopolitical risks are shifting the financial management of the institution. We This time last year, we just saw what was happening in the US with Silicon Valley Bank, etc. And then suddenly there was an incredible amount of shakedown that took place in the markets. And until the US government showed up and said, no, no, we'll take care of all the depositors, regardless of the deposit size. Well, that's a new trend. Is that, are the governments around the world going to start to underwrite that? Because clearly some of these, depositors today, they don't have to show up at a bank branch to get their money out. They can push a few buttons and billions of dollars moves, right? So
Mhm.
it's a very different ecosystem that we are dealing with because of geopolitical events that are happening. Something happens somewhere, something gets done by one of the other large players in the world markets, whether it's China, Russia, or other players, or the US itself, and dramatically things start to shift. And that's where how things are shaping up, how are the directors keeping in line, keeping aligned with the world events, and how plugged are they into things as they're happening real time. So the point you made earlier about the lag factor, well, that has to start to disappear now. It has to start to reduce considerably, because you can no longer, and that's what the point that David Beatty made is foresight. What are the stress tests you're performing for the financial services? What are, how many factors are you taking into account? I was talking to one of the risk officers from one of the big 5 banks, and they said they stress test their various risks with some 37 different factors, using some 37 factors to do the stress test. Well, I think that may be a little too much, but maybe not. Who knows, depending on the size and complexity of an institution. Because don't forget, a large Canadian bank, one of the big 5 banks, they operate in multiple geographies. Their footprint is different, their portfolios are different. Every bank has a different portfolio. And so how do you manage that with all of this going on? And how will it affect your depositors? Because that's what the regulator's prime interest is. Are the depositors going to lose their deposits with a particular institution? Is the government going to have to stand up to the demands of those depositors? Because clearly, I can assure you that none of the deposit insurance funds, can take care of a full enterprise or full industry. It's tough. If things to happen, it's just impossible. Nobody can plan for that. Even if you try to plan for it, it'll be just an exercise in it'll be useless.
Yeah.
So I think, that is one aspect where people have to say. And then, of course, the client base. If a bank's portfolio has concentration of a sector, for example, you look at, people like ExxonMobil or Chevron, etc. We have seen what the shareholders, the activism is rising. Institutionals are demanding a different kind of makeup of the portfolio, the composition of portfolios, different approaches to things. So all of that is new, and we cannot say, well, let's wait for another report to come or another piece of legislation to come. I think we have to start anticipating and put those elements in our business foresight, in our strategy plans.
So Hari, help me with, and this, I think you just hit it on. We need to start anticipating, right? So far, it was all about we need to make sure that we don't have risk, but now we need to start anticipating. So give me an example of something that either you have on your boards or the people you're advising. How do you get people to start anticipating?
Well, you look at some of the scenarios. You say, look at any scenario. First question I ask is, what are you sort of thinking about when you go to sleep at night? What is the things that are worrying you the most when you go to sleep at night? And the information floats within the marketplace. It's amazing the intelligence that is out there in the marketplace.
Yeah.
People who are running the business, not just in your own geography, but in other geographies. I'll use the example of COVID. For example, COVID, the reality, took place in reality. People started talking about it in March of 2020. The first news I was getting out of Singapore was in
December.
Was in December
Of the previous year. Yeah, you're right.
Of 2019.
Yes, that's right. Which is why it was called COVID-19, not COVID 2020.
Correct. And so there you are. Is 4 months not adequate time, or 5 months? In fact, what the bond traders were telling me out of Singapore is that actually they heard something was wrong in September of 2019. And they told me that they were starting to price some risks into the Chinese bonds. Okay, the bonds that China was issuing, or the fundraising that was happening out of China. So the reality was that, let's say 4 months, 3 months, even 2 months for a Western government to devise a strategy to deal with a pandemic, even 2 months is a good enough time to start alerting the public, taking some precautions and whatnot. So that is one good example of what are the signals, what are the signals that are out there in the marketplace that you are taking into account in your strategic planning and preparation.
I love that. So what are some of the signals that you're taking into account? I think that's a great way to sort of cap that conversation. I, Hari, I'd love to get your governance take on ingenuity. With a lot of the leaders that I get on the podcast, I ask them for the leadership take, but I'd like to ask your governance take on ingenuity, and more importantly, the human side of ingenuity as it relates to you, success of the organization whose boards you serve on. What's your take? When has it worked? When has it not? What have you learned?
Well, when you start to just focus on the literal sense of ingenuity, I kind of take a much broader view of that. And I take a broader view because we're not trying to invent in the day-to-day corporate life or an average corporation, whether it's listed on public markets or it's listed or it's a privately held company. You're not trying to invent a new Apple phone, new Motorola phone every day. So the whole aspect is how flexible are you agile? Are you agile in adjusting to the signals that you're hearing and seeing? And how flexible are you? The other element that brings that ingenuity is to say, where where are you going to wait for that perfect information to come? So the decision making process today is so much based on imperfect information. And,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a new skill almost every CEO, every board director has to embrace. How do we embrace that and not be so fearful in case some things go wrong? And there comes the role for the board of directors. If the CEO and their teams are trying to do some of these things that you want to see in the culture of the corporation, then for you, you need, as a director, and in the governance framework that you have, if you don't achieve a particular target or something that is in your strategic plan, do not create the fear that somebody's going to get thrown under the bus. So allow for certain failures with eyes on the pulse, okay, with the feel for the pulse, so things don't get out of hand, you know. And so there's no question that you try to do new things, new ways, and some very simple things, Saquib, the very simple things, just the cross pollination of sectors. When I started ICICI Bank, I kind of brought in people from Procter and Gamble, for example, to help me with marketing, as an example, and that helped us positioning of the brand
Mm-hmm.
because I felt that I needed a completely new approach to certain things as a small bank coming out of India, brand new name in the Canadian marketplace. I didn't know, I didn't want someone to come in and tell me this is how the big five run their marketing campaigns. I needed someone to just get down to the common denominator. And I looked at the banking sector that, look, everybody has the same checking account, the savings account, they're all looking for deposits. And I saw someone from P&G to come and tell me how you sell Tide soap. You know, how do you keep it at the eye level when the customer's shopping for that detergent? And that's sort of, I think, in that particular example, you can put that in the bucket called ingenuity, and you say,
Yeah, sure.
how do you cross-pollinate? Like in the banking sector, I see the same sort of things. How do you look at, people have to think the deposits are the raw material for the industry. How do you get the cheapest deposits in the largest volume? That's the
Hari, I think this is beautiful. And so, for example, what you're bringing in is a slightly different nuance to ingenuity. Ingenuity is, like you said, it's not that everyone's trying to invent the new iPhone, but how do you keep that ingenuity flourishing within your organization is to bring in some perspectives that weren't there, especially at a time where you have to deal with imperfect information. By the way, that's exactly the context of Say Hi to the Future, where Hi stands for human ingenuity. And it's all about clever, inventive, original thinking. And our context in it, the reason why we got so passionate about it is that we need to bring in a different thought process for boards, for leaders, because we are dealing with imperfect information where not everything is going to be completely baked before you can go execute. So your desire to go execute, try a little, keep your fingers on the pulse, and therefore tweak, adjust, and keep moving forward, I think is perfectly Like it's very well said. You are an advocate of say hi to the future.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I often use the expression that you have to turn the pyramid upside down, quite frankly, nowadays, That's that's what I try to tell, whenever I'm having conversations with senior executives and my colleagues on various boards is, problems come and you can come up with solutions and just take a different approach. Exactly the way you summarized.
Yeah. I think this is absolutely fantastic insight. We'll close it off here. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Hari. Thank you for taking
My
time
pleasure.
out, sharing your insights. I think our listeners are going to be in for a treat. I'm sure they'd like to hear more from you. So we will tag you and FanBest Capital in our show notes. But thank you
Thank you.
so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you for all the work that you are doing, Saquib. This is quite great, and I think people will benefit tremendously.